Hi there. I hope you had a good weekend. Thanks very much for joining me for the show today. I've got an amazing guest. As always, it's David Cay Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter joining me today, and it is a good one. I promise you that. My conversation with David starts at about 34 minutes in after the news and clips. Hope you had a good weekend. Congratulations to Dr. Barry Hummel, who I saw on Facebook, ran his 9th half marathon over the weekend. Thank you to Megan Moore, to Carlo. Thank you to Jeff B. and many other people sending great ideas for guest suggestions. Keep them coming, as well as everybody who sent vitamin N pictures, nature photos. Keep them coming as well. standuppapete@gmail.com. Ideas for the show. I can never have enough. I'm very grateful for all of you to be here. I hope to see you at tonight's hangout at 8 p.m. East. I'll be there. I hope you will as well. Also, don't forget to get your tickets for PODJAM if you haven't already. Very excited to see you at the end of March in Las Vegas. Get those tickets now. There's a link to that in the email that I send you and the show notes for every day's show. If you're a subscriber, you'll get that email. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. And you can sign up right now if you haven't already. Let's get to the news, shall we? Lots to discuss. About 27 days of Trump Part 2, and it is no good. Shockingly unsurprising, but let's get to those headlines. Deadly storm sweeping through the South, leaving 9 fatalities, at least 8 people dead after flooding in Kentucky, at least 10 dead in the Southeast totally, as this weather continues to sweep the nation, and there is more to come. So that's a big headline from the weekend. I hope you and yours are okay. If not, let us know, and hopefully our community can do something to help you. As always, the president is now quoting Napoleon. A lot of people referencing that over the weekend. He put out a message on many of his social media platforms, which appeared to quote Napoleon by way of Rod Steiger on Saturday afternoon after his blitzkrieg of executive actions and threats to federal agencies under Elon Musk have been challenged in courts across the country, raising alarms that his administration is preparing to shred court orders and ignite a constitutional crisis. He wrote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." So even the official White House apparently shared the message, endorsing his apparent belief that the president of the United States is incapable of breaking any law, but we already knew that. But scary foreshadowing or just a distraction? Get to more of that with our audio clips. And speaking of absolutely terrible men, his partner, the co-president, Elon Musk, apparently has fathered a 13th child with a MAGA influencer. She claims Elon Musk's 13th child and has been raising him for 5 months, apparently. The 26-year-old conservative firebrand made the announcement on Valentine's Day. Elon Musk already has 12 children from at least 3 different women. Of course, Donald Trump has, 5 children from 3 different women? Great guys, really. I mean, if they weren't so white, they wouldn't get away with it. What is this, Scooby-Doo? Nope, it's real-life America. I thought this was an interesting story and wanted to share it with you. The NAACP wants black Americans to steer their buying power toward companies that haven't pulled back from diversity, equity, and inclusion programs under conservative pressure. The nation's oldest civil rights organization is listing which brands have stood by or reversed past commitments to DEI. That's right. And the NAACP has listed companies that dump DEI in its tactical spending guide for black Americans. So go check that out at NAACP.org. A lot of attention, rightly so, being paid to the 61st Munich Security Conference, the world's leading forum for international security policy, took place over the weekend. It was designed in 1963, Heather Cox Richardson writes, to be an independent venue for experts and policymakers to discuss the most pressing security issues around the world. But at the conference on Friday, the vice president, J.D. Vance, launched what The Guardian called a brutal ideological assault against Europe, attacking the values the United States used to share with Europe, but which now American Vice President J.D. Vance and other members of the Trump administration are working to destroy. J.D. Vance and MAGA Christian nationalists reject the principles of secular democracy and instead align with leaders like Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. They claim that the equal rights central to democracy undermine nations by treating women and racial, religious, and gender minorities as equal to white Christian men. They want to see an end to immigration that they believe weakens a nation's people, and for government to reinforce traditional, religious, and patriarchal values. So that's nice. That's the way Heather Cox Richardson writes it up in her most popular daily email today. And I've got more of that in the clips coming up. It's very hard to keep track of all the layoffs that they are doing in the federal government. Elon Musk and his team of terrible pirates. The Trump administration, however, halted the firings of hundreds of federal employees who were tasked with working on the nation's nuclear weapons program because they accidentally fired them. It's left workers confused and experts cautioning that the pirates' blind cost-cutting will put communities at risk. The purge just ahead of a long President's Day weekend was swift. Some employees at the CDC were told that they had 2 hours to collect their belongings and leave before losing access to the building. At Homeland Security, 405 people were cut, including more than 130 at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, more than 200 at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Firings have affected more than 3,000 people at the U.S. Forest Service, more than 1,000 at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Hundreds of thousands of people could be affected, according to data from the Office of Personnel Management, although the full scope of firings is not immediately clear. We really don't quite know exactly what the full scope is. And the mass firings are in addition to the voluntary, quote, deferred resignation program the Trump administration has offered to federal workers who agree to quit later this year in exchange for still being paid for several months. Apparently about 75,000 people have accepted that offer as of last Wednesday. The administration is aiming to cut up to 10% of the federal workforce. I mean, we can deal with that, right? Federal employee compensation makes up about 6.6% of the overall budget. So even these mass firings are unlikely to have a major impact on the government's budget deficit and national debt, which is really the hardest thing to hear about all this. Most of the spending is in healthcare and defense anyway. We'll continue to see these stories and hear these stories. Reach out to me if you're a federal worker or know someone. I've already talked to a few of you, but you can definitely reach out to me. You can talk to me on Signal if you feel that's the safest place. Just email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I'll give you my covert contacts. Apparently in rural West Texas, a measles outbreak is growing with no end in sight. At least 49 cases have been confirmed. Health officials are scrambling to get a handle on the vaccine-preventable outbreak. They suspect about 200 to 300 people may be affected. What else do I have for you? SNL 50th, the NBA All-Star Weekend, and Captain America #1 at the box office. And I contributed to that with Ava. Ava and I see all the Marvel movies together. We have for years, and I went into New York City yesterday to see my second-year college student and have a little lunch. We went to see the movie. We liked it. It's gotten a lot of bad reviews, but we liked the movie, and we had a great time, as we always do. All right, those are the headlines that I've got for you from the weekend. There's a lot more and plenty that I missed. Always want to hear from you. Standupwithpete@gmail.com. I think that's the 90th time I've given out my email on this podcast episode alone. But let's get to the clips that I've got for you. Now, the Liberals are making a comeback in Canada. That's right. It would seem that Trump's threats to make Canada the 51st state is bringing the country together. I've got two clips to prove it. But first, here is the conservative, Pierre Poilievre. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but over the weekend, the guy who built his entire profile by relentlessly targeting Justin Trudeau as the culprit for Canadians' affordability struggles made a major speech. And now the enemy is no longer the Liberals and Ottawa, but Washington, completely changing the political dynamic in Canada. And who would have thunk it? Well, here he is talking about it over the weekend. And I think he's voice wins with Mitt Romney.
We must respond with strength. And strength means leverage. America has leverage, and we have leverage. I will use that leverage. Retaliation is only the beginning. Yes, we need to retaliate. If they put tariffs on our steel and aluminum, I will put tariffs on their steel and aluminum. If they hit us with generalized tariffs, we will respond dollar for dollar. Yes, we will carefully target American goods that we don't need, can produce ourselves, or we can get elsewhere to maximize the impact on Americans while minimizing the impact on ourselves. As Winston Churchill said, though, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after exhausting all other possibilities. So let me spell out the possibilities for our American friends and speak directly to them. Option one, you can carry out an unprovoked attack on our economy. Your consumers will pay more and your workers will make less. Gas prices will skyrocket. You will turn a loyal friend into a resentful neighbor, forced to match tariff with tariff and to seek friends everywhere else. Both our economies will weaken, leaving less money for defense and security, and our enemies will grow stronger. Yeah. See, the problem is at times we might be too polite, soft-spoken, and humble for our own good. We are slow to anger and quick to forgive, but never confuse our kindness with weakness.
Yeah, wow, there you go. And that is the Conservative leader in Canada. Well, here's one of the top Liberal leaders in Canada, our old friend Chrystia Freeland, who is on with our mutual friend Ali Velshi. This is where I met Chrystia on Ali Velshi's old show on CNN. And here she is pulling zero punches.
Why is that? Donald Trump's got supporters in the stock market. He's got supporters on Wall Street. Many of his economic team, people you deal with on the other side, understand that generally speaking, tariffs can be an important tool when used properly. Generally speaking, when used as a scalpel, when used as a sledgehammer across the board, they generally result in inflation over the medium term. That's a problem Canadians are going to have, but it's a problem Americans literally voted for Donald Trump to solve.
You are exactly right, Ali. And I think, the relationship with Canada is unique. And that's why when tariffs are proposed on Canada, you get such a negative stock market reaction. Because the reality is the trade is balanced and mutually beneficial. I mean, Ali, in your intro, you talked about the trade deal that governs our relationship. And here's the paradox. Right now, we have a trade deal, USMCA, we call it CUSMA, which was negotiated by Donald Trump. It was negotiated by Donald Trump. It got support from Nancy Pelosi when she was Speaker. President Trump has called this the best trade deal in the world. So it's pretty absurd to be trying to violate that. And I think the other reason we're seeing such an adverse market reaction is Canadians are really united right now. I would say Canadians are resolute. There is a wave of patriotism here in Canada, the likes of which I have not experienced in my lifetime. And Canadians are really united around the conviction that if you do hit us, if these tariffs come into effect, we will hit back and we will impose dollar for dollar retaliation. Now, some of your listeners, Ali, may be thinking, well, so what? We're so much bigger than Canada. Why would that matter? But the reality is Canada, uniquely in the world, is in a position to have economic leverage in this relationship. The fact is we are America's largest export market by far. Canada by itself buys more from the United States than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. So you could have those four countries retaliating against you. They wouldn't have as much leverage as Canada on its own. And, I think Americans are the ones who invented the term, the customer is always right. Well, we are your biggest customer. So watch out. If you hit us, we will hit back. And our retaliation, unlike these across-the-board tariffs, is going to be surgically targeted. We're going to design it so we do the minimum harm to ourselves and have the maximum impact in the United States. And we are going to target constituencies that have particular influence in the White House. So one of the things I am proposing is a 100% tariff on Teslas. And I am inviting all the countries in the world that would be affected by these tariffs to join us. I think that would get us some attention in the Oval Office.
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, we're just getting started. How about that from Chrystia Freeland and the Conservative leader whose name I cannot pronounce in Canada? Somebody's going to have to do that for me. I refuse to look it up because America first, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, You know, comedian Bill Burr was an old friend of mine. We used to be really good friends, and I don't talk to him anymore. But the clip that went viral over the weekend, I saw in a few different places. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it uncensored, so I'm really sorry about the beeps here. But he goes off on billionaires, and I think it's worth it. I mean, for what it's worth, I said that we should eat them on CNN a couple weeks ago, but it didn't get as much traction as Bill Burr saying this after he got a letter from a woman, a single mom, saying she can't afford to keep the lights on.
This is so, the amount of people that are struggling out there because of these f***ing billionaires. And they got us all arguing liberal and conservative. We got to stop doing that. Like, I am so tired of hearing about people going to bed worried about what's going to happen next week. There is so much money in this country. And there's so much work being done, you know. And if you work a week at a job, you should be able to pay your rent. You shouldn't have to go out and get another job and still be struggling. It's bad for the country because then the kids don't see their parents and they're not getting the upbringing that they need. It's so these billionaires. They need to be put down, you know, like rabid dogs. They're like rabid with greed and just going out and just dividing everybody.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, it's not just the billionaires dividing everybody. I really wish Bill would focus more on the actual primary culprits that have been doing it for our entire life, which starts with conservative and right-wing media, to be sure, in my opinion. Well, that's my opinion. Okay, let's go to some of the Sunday shows, which had all kinds of crazy stuff happening, and starting with Meet the Press, where Kirsten Welker had a economic advisor who has been on the right for a long time. Kevin Hassett is his name, and he seems like this innocent, unassuming nerd. But he's a dangerous idiot who, when he was there during COVID, predicted there would be like 0 deaths. And now he's talking about bird flu. Again, this guy is an economics guy, and he's not even good at that. But here is his analysis of why the price of eggs is high and what's happened to all the chickens. I mean, truly a real fool for saying this.
Well, sure. What is the plan? What are you going to do?
Yeah, so again, the Biden plan was to just, kill chickens. And they spent billions of dollars just randomly killing chickens within a perimeter where they found a sick chicken. And so I just went to the grocery store. I shopped for our family in part because I love to look at prices. And there were no eggs at the store yesterday, just a few. And so that happened because they killed all the chickens. And so what we need to do is have better ways with biosecurity and medication and so on to make sure that the perimeter doesn't have to kill the chickens. We have a better, smarter perimeter. And so having a smart perimeter is what we're working on, and we're finalizing the ideas about how to do that with the best scientists in government. And that's the kind of thing that should have happened a year ago. And if it had, then egg prices would be, a lot better than they are now. But the avian flu is a real thing. And by the way, it's spread mostly by ducks and geese. And so think about it. They're killing chickens to stop the spread, but chickens don't really fly. The spread is happening from the geese and the ducks. And so why does it make any sense to have a big perimeter of dead chickens when it's the ducks and the geese that are spreading it?
Oh my God. Oh my God. What a dumb fuck. First of all, it has already spread to cow and cattle. Second of all, ducks and geese fly above and drop their shit on the chickens. And to say that that's their only plan, that the Biden administration had, is so ridiculous. That guy should not be listened to and shouldn't be asked about that. By the way, that was not Kirsten Welker at NBC. That was Margaret Brennan at Face the Nation. Here is Kirsten Welker, though. Meet the Press. She was talking to Volodymyr Zelensky. She had a huge interview and conversation with him. Here's a clip.
Thing that President Trump said this week. He did not say yes when he was asked if he sees Ukraine as an equal member in the peace process. He did say later that Ukraine would have a seat at the table. Have you been given any assurances that Ukraine will have an equal seat at the negotiating table?
So I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. And our people, never. And our adults and children and everybody. It can't be so. This is the war in Ukraine against us, and it's our human losses. And we are thankful for all the support, unity between USA, in USA, around Ukraine support, bipartisan unity, bipartisan support. We are thankful for all of this, but there is no any leader in the world who can really make a deal with Putin without us, about us. Of course.
All right, there's just a little bit of a longer interview that was really important and made a lot of news over the weekend. Now let's go to CBS Sunday Morning, where CBS's Robert Costa did an interesting report on the federal government, and he talked to best-selling author Michael Lewis, who has probably covered the federal government better than anybody in his books. He's got a new book called Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service, and here's a little bit of that from the weekend.
From their government.
I think as we speak, our country is getting an education of what its government does because it feels it has to. Who knew what USAID was 3 weeks ago?
In an upcoming book, best-selling author Michael Lewis poses the question, who is government?
Virtually every existential risk we face, we don't turn to the private sector to respond to it. We turn to the government. I mean, the federal government's mission is to keep us safe. And you don't really know that insurance policy is not there until it isn't.
The book is based on a Washington Post series Lewis edited last year, with little-known stories of federal workers.
Just look at Christopher Mark's life work. If we just removed Christopher Mark from the history of the federal government, thousands of coal miners are dead. It's one person.
Profiling military cemetery managers and mission specialists for space exploration, Lewis and his co-authors make the case that claims of an impersonal, so-called deep state are off base, and that while there may be places for trims and updated systems, they argue the federal workforce is largely individuals dedicated to the public good.
People who have been attracted to a problem. The government is there to solve lots of problems, usually problems that the market doesn't want to solve.
Some people say government should run like a business. Are they right?
No, they're wrong. I don't see how you would run the government as a business, because the kind of problems the government is addressing, they're addressing it because you can't make money addressing it.
Yes, it's that easy. They're trying to privatize everything, though, so that they can, but it's not in the public's interest, of course. There you go. That looks like a really good book, Michael Lewis's new book, CBS Sunday Morning. There you go. All right. Now let's go back to MSNBC, where Ali Velshi was also talking to former Veteran Affairs Inspector General, a guy named Michael Massal, during his interview, who was just laid off along with many others in a 2-sentence email. He's recently fired. They recently fired a number of inspectors general, and mass firings have been very controversial. And here's a little bit of Massal slamming the administration, claiming his dismissal was a clear violation of the law.
What's the case that you've got right now? The merits of the case are that you were fired incorrectly?
Correct. We got a 2-sentence email on Friday night, January 24th. Under the law, and this is something Congress felt very strongly about, the president does have the right to remove IGs. But if the president wants to remove IGs, he's got to do at least 2 things. One is give the Congress 30 days notice. This is so Congress can decide whether or not they want to talk to the president about it. And secondly, give a detailed case-specific reason why they're firing. Again, so Congress has more information and the public has more information. If we didn't do our job, we should be replaced. And so neither of those were done in this situation. It's a clear violation of the law, and that's why we brought the lawsuit.
Why do you think you, as nonpartisan independent people, have not been included in this process? Why is it easier just to get rid of you all?
Obviously, we would love to know the reason. No reason was given. You know, one thing you could say is maybe they don't want the independent watchdogs. Maybe they want lapdogs instead of watchdogs. You know, we do the job. We bring hard-hitting reports when necessary. We're able to take on senior leaders at different agencies if they've done something wrong. And so maybe that's not something that they want.
All right, there you go. Now let's get to Congress, where at the House Ways and Means Committee last week, you had a Democrat named Tom Suozzi of Long Island, just elected, smart guy, and he was questioning witnesses about all these firings and about what Elon Musk is doing, what access he has, and apparently nobody knows.
What kind of access does Mr. Musk and his team have? What kind of changes have they been making to the computer programs? How many of those changes to computer programs are permanent? And how will that affect people going forward? Mr. LeBlanc, what's he doing?
I don't know what he's doing.
I think he's
Mr.
looking
Sepp,
do you know what he's doing?
No.
Mr. Ladd, do you know what he's doing?
It would be inappropriate for me for comment on
Ms. Kochlicek, do you know what he's doing?
We have not looked at that.
Ms. Olson?
No.
Yeah, nobody knows anything. You know who does? Barack Obama. And I saw one of the shows over the weekend grab this clip. It was Meet the Press. They went back in their, quote, Meet the Press minute and took a clip from Barack Obama, who at the beginning of his, I think, first term, he talked about what it meant to cut government. This is a great clip. It's hard to listen to because he was so smart compared to what we've had.
The debate over government spending is as old as Washington itself. But in a 2012 interview with Meet the Press, President Barack Obama made the case that cutting costs isn't always the right answer.
You are not only going to cut your way to prosperity. One of the fallacies, I think, that has been promoted is this notion that deficit reduction is only a matter of cutting programs that are really important to seniors, students, and so forth. That has to be part of the mix. But what I ran on and what the American people elected me to do was to put forward a balanced approach to make sure that there's shared sacrifice, that everybody is doing a little bit more. And it is very difficult for me to say to a senior citizen or a student or a mom with a disabled kid, you are going to have to do with less, but we're not going to ask millionaires or billionaires to do more.
Yeah, remember that? I guess that was in his second term. That was 2012. All right, now let's get to the Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, who just left the New York Times, and this is what he had to say about tariffs on CNN.
Well, there are only a few countries out there that have significant tariffs on U.S. products. India is one of them. Although India has, Indian tariffs are vastly lower than they used to be, but they're still significant. Brazil still has significant tariffs, though, again, they've liberalized a lot. The European Union has practically no tariffs on U.S. products. They, basically, wealthy countries have very low tariff rates on each other. But the announcement from the White House suggested that they're going to call anything they feel like a tariff. So they might call value-added taxes tariffs. And if they do that, then we're on a full-scale trade war with the European Union. They're not tariffs, but if the White House decides to call them tariffs and they're a major source of revenue on the other side of the Atlantic, then we're in crazy territory. So I have no idea. The amazing thing about all of this, if you want to break in, but there isn't any coherent argument here. And there doesn't even seem to be a clearly defined interest group. This is just that Donald Trump has a thing about tariffs and has decided that he is at least going to talk loudly about imposing tariffs. And what he actually does, God knows.
God knows, indeed. All right, let's head back over to Germany and a bit of a recap from CBS Sunday Morning.
Vice President J.D. Vance.
In his keynote address at the Munich Security Conference on Friday, Vice President J.D. Vance pulled no punches.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
That threat, he implied, comes from mainstream European politicians, some of them sitting in the audience, who had failed to control immigration. Then, when the far right reacted, as it has done in Germany, Vance said Europe's governments muzzled anti-immigration voices and eroded free speech.
If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you.
Die wir vorhin vom US-Vicepräsident gehört haben, nicht unkommentiert lassen.
Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, said comparing European governments to authoritarian regimes was just unacceptable.
Das ist nicht akzeptabel.
There's been a furious reaction in European media, too. The vice president's speech was called vengeful, preachy, unkind. And Germany's chancellor said that curbs on far-right hate speech don't undermine democracy in Germany, but rather protect it in a country that knows a thing or two about fascism. Then on Saturday, Vance boarded the plane for home, leaving Europeans pondering what appears to be a seismic shift in their relationship with their old friend, the United States.
There you go, CBS Sunday Morning's report. But before I move out away from that, I do want to play you this clip I thought was really interesting. This is the chairman of the Munich Security Conference for the past 3 years, gave a very emotional closing speech, and he actually starts crying at the end of it and literally openly weeping and hugging somebody. Because, you know, the Europeans are huge pussies when they see history repeating itself. Here's Christoph Husgen with a very powerful moment from Germany.
With Ewald von Kleist, this conference started as a transatlantic conference. After the speech of Vice President Vance on Friday, we have to fear that our common value base is not that common anymore. I'm very grateful to all those European politicians that spoke out and reaffirmed the values and principles that they are defending. No one did this better than President Zelensky. Let me conclude, and this becomes difficult.
All right, there you go. Those are the clips I've got for you, the headlines as well. And let's listen to Adam Sandler last night singing a song on Saturday Night Live's 50th anniversary show. Take it away, Sandman.
Okay, here we go. Everyone in this room has something in common. All of our lives were changed by the show. Everyone in this room has something else in common. None of us were allowed to use the little bathroom in Lorne's office. 50 years. Saturday Night Live's been on for 50 years. 50 years of your sketch killing at read-through. And finding out they didn't pick it because the host didn't want to take off his shirt. 50 years of Tuesday late night pizza. 35 years of Pepto-Bismol from Nurse Teresa. Yeah, baby. 50 years of the cast looking straight at the cue cards. And 30 years of drunk Wally holding the cue cards upside down. Atta baby, Wally! 50 years of writers seeing Spielberg at Lorne's monitors, not laughing at one of their sketches that he obviously hated. 50 years of those same writers then getting wasted at the after party and loudly telling everybody that Jaws was overrated. 50 years of prank calling some New York magazine critic. 50 years of finding out your favorite musician's anti-Semitic. 50 years of asking an intern to pick up your laundry at 2:30 a.m., not realizing that the intern was Martin Scorsese's kid, or Nora Ephron's kid, or Randy Newman's kid, or whoever Lorne had dinner with on Wednesday night's kid. 50 years of cast members saying, I'm not getting on enough. Their spirits are broken and their hearts are full of malice. 50 years of them storming off to tell Lorne how they really feel.
All right, I hate to cut it off there, but I can't play the whole 6 minutes for you. You'll have to go watch it. I'm sure many of you already did. I was in bed early and up early to get this podcast out for you. And now it's time to get to my guest. He is one of our all-time favorites, of course, David Cay Johnston, investigative journalist, author, specialist in economics and tax issues, winner of the 2001 Pulitzer Prize-winning winner at the New York Times, written some of the most important books I've ever read, including Free Lunch, How the Wealthiest Americans Enrich Themselves at Government Expense and Stick You with the Bill, as well as Perfectly Legal, the covert campaign to rig our system to benefit the super rich and cheat everybody else, a New York Times bestseller. Loved both those most, but he's written books about Donald Trump as well, and he covered him when he was in New York for a while. He's now still working, still teaching at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I was really happy to get to sit down with him as always. So let's do it. Go follow him, go support him, go read dcreport.org. It's David Cay Johnston. Breaking news. Before I started my conversation with David Cay Johnston, he told me, did you hear what happened at Stonewall? Here it is from ABC News and every other outlet. The National Park Service eliminated references to transgender people from its Stonewall National Monument website on Thursday, which now only refers to those who are lesbian, gay, and bisexual. What used to be listed as LGBTQ+ in the monument has been changed to LGB. David Cay Johnston, can we look past that? That's petty. It's horrible. It's depressing. It makes me want to fight, but there are bigger fish to fry. Why should we care about that?
Well, this is right out of George Orwell. And remember that George Smith, the central character in 1984's job, was to rewrite history so people would not know actual history. They would know only what the state wanted them to know. And you could certainly dismiss this and say, oh, it's symbolic and who cares? And who cares if you're cis and straight like me? Well, you should care because if you want to become our dictator, and that's what I've been saying for 9.5 years is Donald's goal, because Donald really believes he's special. Nobody else is competent to do this. You have to rewrite history. You have to remove history. Wasn't that long ago that the state of Texas was on the verge of adopting a new textbook, which said that Black people came here from Africa in search of better lives. And only because the New York Times exposed that did that not go into the textbooks that children would be reading today. Because we need to get rid of, there was no slavery. What are you talking about? And those who were enslaved, they were better off, and other absolute falsehoods. And this is part of a pattern you're going to see much more of. They're wiping out references to accomplishments by Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, indigenous people, gay people, women.
And I think that while all of those are horrific and we see exactly what that means, a lot of these things are, Stonewall was a long time ago, but what else they're doing is they're erasing the recent past. Most specifically, what I saw a lot of reporting on was there's supposed to be a plaque at that tunnel outside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where January 6th, the horrible attack on police officers was. They were going to put a plaque up there, and that plaque never made it up there. So they're erasing the recent history by preventing things to be commemorated, by redoing the investigations into January 6th. But with that, you're talking about Stonewall. We're talking about women's history and suffrage and Black history. I'm talking about what we saw with our own eyes. They're erasing it.
Well, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm not predicting this will happen, but I won't be shocked if a plaque does go up and refers to January 6th as a day of love where patriots work to take back our democracy.
Oh God, that would put me way over the top.
That would be even more Orwellian.
Oh man.
You know, we have an administration that has been crystal clear, at least in my observations of it, about what's going on. They are white supremacists. They are misogynists. Donald has said many times, and people should know I've covered him since 1988. In fact, I wrote that year and again in 1992 about how he might become president someday, that this administration is trying to destroy America as we have known it and make sure that anyone who isn't white, straight, male, and nominally Christian knows their place. So and they're working very hard to do that, Pete.
Yeah, and that's very well said and well documented. But the damages the suffering that's going to occur, the damages that are going to be done are going to affect white, straight, male Christians.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Bannon yesterday said, I wouldn't mess with Medicaid. MAGA, a lot of MAGA on Medicaid. My question to you is, before we get specific of any of these things, what happens, do you think, and how does this get reported out? Because they can't target, they can try to target blue state liberals, minorities, et cetera, but they can't be that specific, I don't think, certainly not with the idiots in charge of targeting. So what happens when MAGA loses their benefits, their subsidies, their jobs?
Well, much as they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act by confusing people, there are lots of interviews with people who go, oh, the Affordable Care Act is this critical to my family. What do you think of Obamacare? Oh, we have to get rid of that. And of course, it's the same thing. There's a real risk for Trump and company if they try to cut Medicaid and get rid of the Affordable Care Act. I don't think that's going to be in the front of their plans to do. But there will be damage. We're already seeing some farmers saying, wait a minute, I sell my corn or soybeans or rice primarily to the Agency for International Development, the American Humanitarian Aid Organization.
Right, USAID, yeah.
Yes, and you're harming my business interests. There are going to be Republican lawmakers from the heartland who are going to say, we're going to be hurt by this. Yeah. And sooner or later, the following is going to happen. There are some really pernicious viruses out there, vastly worse than COVID. 25 years ago or so, we had MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome.
Yeah, I remember that.
We know of 2,500 infections. 800 of those people died. That's incredibly deadly.
That one. That'll get you.
There are similar viruses in parts of Africa that we have corralled because we're providing people with antiviral medicines and other treatment. That's all been stopped. Well, those viruses will now spring back to life in those people's bodies. They will eventually kill them. But in the meantime, those viruses are going to start hopscotching around the planet on jetliners. And we're going to have at some point another pandemic from these kinds of illnesses, which may be vastly more deadly than we had before. And we have running our health systems a man who doesn't believe in vaccines, R.F. Kennedy Jr. So letting Trump be Trump, LTBT, let Trump be Trump, will undo and get some people from practical reality to see what's gone wrong. But the price we're going to pay for that's enormous.
As much as anybody, the price in so many different ways, so many different sectors of our economy that you can speak to. So I've got all these notes on which to ask you, but I thought it might be really interesting because a thing or two about the law as well, to ask you about the news that broke, a couple days ago and over the past couple of days, that the Trump administration Department of Justice is going to let Eric Adams off the hook. They're trying to drop all charges. Now, of course, it was the Biden Department of Justice that indicted him in the first place for corruption charges, which you could probably speak to if we need to. But the bottom line is a Democratic president's Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, indicts a Democratic mayor of New York.
Of the most Democratic city in the country.
Eric Adams. And then Trump comes in. And Eric Adams basically reaches out, I think, to make a deal. And the deal, it seems, is, yes, we'll drop all charges and you have to let us do whatever we want vis-a-vis deportations, ICE, immigration, and not prevent any of those things from happening, which New York City has done in the past. What is this called? The Department of Justice right now, the lead lawyers on it have resigned. It's a huge story last night. It's a brave thing to do. They then kicked it to, I think, a different sector, right? The Department of Justice in D.C. Those guys then resigned. So they can't get anybody in the Department of Justice to do the work that needs to be done to actually drop the charges against Eric Adams. What do you want to say about that?
They will find somebody who will do this eventually. This is an utterly corrupt deal. It is the very definition of what the framers of our Constitution were worried about. Early in the history of our country, Benjamin Franklin was our ambassador to France. When he left, the King of France gave him a bejeweled snuff box. And there was a huge scandal about this, not because of any venality by Benjamin Franklin, but because it suggested that someone would try to buy our government and our policies. And that's what the framers were worried about. They all knew we would always have individual people like Eric Adams who do corrupt things, but you have to protect the institution from that and get those people out. What Donald Trump is doing here with pardoning people who attacked police officers and who, when pardoned, said, we're going to go hurt more people. By pardoning the former governor of Illinois who tried to sell the seat that Barack Obama vacated when he became president, and other people, is to institutionalize corruption just so long as the corruption benefits Donald. And because he controls the Justice Department through his utterly corrupt Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and he has his former criminal defense lawyers. Remember, Donald Trump is a convicted felon in senior positions in the Justice Department. They're going to set up a system to go after people Donald thinks are his enemies and to protect people who are his friends. Now, I don't expect most of the MAGA crowd to understand that because it isn't something direct to them. It's not visceral to them. What's going to happen with the, as Donald loves to say, the poorly educated, is inflation is already ticking up now when it had been coming down under Biden sharply. We are seeing problems again with the availability of various kinds of goods because of the policies of this administration. And it's going to take a while. But what Donald proposes to do on an economic front with tariffs has to lead to higher prices. Donald doesn't understand that because he is, in terms of economics, a mercantilist. The mercantilists were the people prior to Adam Smith writing The Wealth of Nations in 1776. That's the first book that explained market economics. So, Pete, if you and I were talking, and this was right now the year 1550, we would believe in two critical things that Adam Smith undid. The first one is all acts of virtue are Christian virtue. If you're a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or anything else, you cannot have virtue. Secondly, we would believe that every piece of gold that the Spanish or the British or the French have is a piece of gold we don't have because there's a fixed amount of wealth in the world. And in Donald's mind, he doesn't see economic growth because he's never done economic growth. He is a cash extractor. Every business he ran, with one exception, he had no money in. He borrowed all of the money, took a fee off the top up front, so he had a negative position, and then sucked cash out of them until the business failed. And so Donald doesn't know how to create wealth. We know as a society how to create wealth. My goodness, compare us to the founding of the country in 1787, compare us to the year 1900, compare us to the year when Ronald Reagan took office, 1981. We've been fabulously successful at creating wealth, not so much at distributing it, but absolutely at creating it.
Yeah, well said, well said.
And Donald thinks China and Canada and Mexico pay the tariffs, and nobody can get through to him that, no, it's effectively a sales tax on Americans. And the worst part of this, Pete, economically, is that the tariffs on these foreign countries also make it possible for domestic companies to raise their prices. So just imagine for a moment that you own Pete Dominick cars and you sell them out your factory to your dealers at $10,000 each and you make $1,000 profit. And China has a competing car. Donald puts his tariff on it. He was proposing 60%. So they now have to charge people $16,000. Well, you're not going to keep your price at 10. You're going to raise your price to $15,000. You're going to make a profit not of $1,000 a car, but $6,000. And let's assume because of the higher price and people can't afford it, that you sell half as many cars. You're making 3 times the profit you were making before. So this is a scheme to drag money out of the pockets of consumers and put it into the pockets of people who own companies. And one of the best signs that that's what's going on occurred yesterday, or day before yesterday. Chevron, the second biggest oil company after ExxonMobil, announced record revenues, record profits, record amounts of oil produced, record amounts of oil refined, record dividends to shareholders.
Yeah.
And a record stock buyback for them of $75 billion worth of existing shares, and laying off as many as 20% of the people who made all that possible. This is a scheme to give the rich even more and to destroy jobs, to hurt people. And eventually it has to fail. It can't work in the long run. If lots of people lose their jobs, the whole economy will slide. But that will take time.
man, I'm trying to think of which are the best and most important issues to ask the great David Cay Johnston, but I got to ask you this one. This is a story I feel like I haven't heard enough about. Maybe I just haven't read enough about it, but it seems pretty consequential. Here's Ken Delaney writing at NBC News. In a little notice directive on her first day in office, Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered a halt to a years-old federal law enforcement effort which combats secret influence campaigns by China, Russia, and other adversaries that try to curry favor and sow chaos in American politics. Buried on the fourth page of one of the 14 policy memos Bondi issued Wednesday, the order disbands the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, pares back enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, despite years of warnings by U.S. intelligence agencies that the foreign malign influence operations involving disinformation were a growing and dangerous threat. And that sounds conservative to me, because I think foreign malign influence is a huge reason it's impossible to prove that why Donald Trump won in 2016. But to the question of the disbanding of the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, why did they do that?
Well, because this is an utterly corrupt administration, and they think somehow they will get some other benefit from it. The principal job of counterintelligence is with the FBI. There have been a number of known cases where the FBI was able to stop terrorist attacks. They would have been bombings or shootings or other crimes. There are many, many more we're not going to hear about because of the need to maintain security on that, because there are other bad people out there. But essentially, the Trump administration has just told President Xi in China, Kim in North Korea, Vladimir Putin, MBS in Saudi Arabia, and most important, the mullahs in Iran, that they are now free to come and assassinate Americans, attack Americans. And it's because these people don't know what they're doing. Remember, we have a president of the United States who in his first term, shortly after he took office, went to Japan. He stopped off in Honolulu because there's a Trump hotel, has his name on it. And in typical Trump fashion, it's not on the beach, it's a block back. On their way from the Trump hotel, that he doesn't own it, just gets paid for his name on it, to go to Pearl Harbor and the USS Arizona Memorial, where there are about 2,800 sailors who died. He goes to his chief of staff, retired Marine General Kelly. What are we going here for? And Kelly, in his memoir, says he had to explain to Trump what happened on December 7, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. Donald didn't know. How can you grow up in America and not have at least a minimal understanding of the Japanese attack on January 7th? And December 7th, 1941. We have a man in the White House who is appallingly ignorant. And I've had many conversations one-on-one with Donald where I had to restrain myself from just laughing at how uninformed he is. Yeah. Trust me, at times I just had to suppress the desire to burst out laughing at him. And he surrounded himself with people, they don't know anything about national security, diplomacy. And this is a 3-dimensional, if not 4 or 5-dimensional game of world chess. It's not checkers.
Let me ask you about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau being attacked, closed, defunded. The main U.S. agency tasked with overseeing the financial products and services used by everyday Americans, from credit cards to checking accounts to home loans, is the latest target of the Trump administration's effort to remake the federal government. That's NPR putting it lightly. I put it a lot darker. I followed this. I covered this. I was on the air every day talking to people like you about the global financial crisis, the causes, and the solutions to prevent it from ever happening again, which negatively affected wealthy, affluent white people like me, who bought a house in 2007, turned the key, and then was underwater for the next 12 years. So this agency was created to protect us from the banks, credit card companies, all kinds of different scams and scammers. And it was very successful. You could pick any agency apart. You can point to any mistake they made, any kind of interpreted waste. Yep. But with this one, its importance, what are your concerns about that one?
Well, this agency was conceived by Elizabeth Warren, whom I've known almost as long as I've known Donald. And what Congress had ultimately adopted was not exactly what she wanted, but close enough. We've spent as taxpayers about $6 billion on it since 2011, and they've recovered more than $21 billion. So here's a government program that is incredibly beneficial. It's a 3.5 to 1 ratio, and the people who benefit from it are folks who let's remember, Wells Fargo Bank created 8 million phony accounts and charged people money for them. There are all sorts of companies that you can show, here is your email to me canceling my subscription or whatever, and yet you keep taking money from me and won't stop. And the credit card companies say, well, they have an authorization from you and they won't do anything. This agency steps in. Gee, I paid off my mortgage, but suddenly the bank is putting my house up for sale for non-payment of the mortgage. Here's the document filed at the courthouse where the bank would say, we don't know anything about that. These horrible things that shouldn't happen. And of course, you have to shut that down if what you're trying to do is compromise these big banks and other institutions. Now, here's one of the related problems. If you lower the standards for things, then honest companies have to engage in dishonest behavior. When in the late 1900s, very end of the century, so 25, 30 years ago, MCI came along and said, we'll sell you long-distance telephone for nothing, almost nothing. And AT&T's chairman, Michael Armstrong, had an internal study done going, how can they sell long-distance services for a tiny fraction of what we pay? And it turns out the study people came back to him and said, the only way they can do this is dishonest accounting. It's what they're selling, what they're telling their investors has to all be lies. Well, in fact, we eventually learned it was lies, and Bernie Ebbers got a long prison sentence for this. But AT&T, to compete, was going to go lose its business unless they did similar sorts of things. Now, Donald Trump was asked under oath once, what do you know about accounting? I don't know anything about accounting.
Yeah.
They said the interrogators, because they had him under oath, spent page after page after page tying him down 6 ways to heaven that he doesn't know anything about accounting. So he wouldn't understand any of this. And all he knows is, oh, Obama was in favor of this. Bad, must be gotten rid of. Elizabeth Warren, bad, get rid of it.
You use the MCI example, but I think the more recent example, which is very similar, is that a bunch of banks took these risks and gave out these risky loans, and then more reasonable banks with better credit ratings and loan lenders had to get on board to be able to compete until, in the end, even the government lender had to get on board and give out loans to stay in business as well. And so that story was never told very easily or accurately to the American public.
Well, I'm going to question you there. I wrote about it. I took part in what was called the autopsy of the corrections. But the stories that appeared in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere were not well done. And my former newspaper, the New York Times, which overall is incredibly important, but like every other institution, screws up, unfortunately had a reporter on this who wrote a book saying that essentially the bankers were the victims of the 2008 collapse. It led to the TV series that he's getting paid for. He is an apologist for Wall Street. He's not inaccurate. His point of view is apologia for the rich and powerful on Wall Street. And they were the perpetrators, yet he portrays them as the victims.
Well, that's often the case to get us divided. It happens at the school board level as well about all kinds of things. So, but the point being, CFPB was created to prevent, in this case, the banks from breaking rules and giving out irresponsible loans and everything else that they did. And now the CFPB has been destroyed. And that's only just a little bit of what it does. And so now the banks and other businesses can have a lot more leeway and free reign to scam and screw us. But there's that one. And Elon.
Now the problem is, Pete, that the MAGA people who are going to be the victims of this. Yeah. They're going to have it explained to them by Donald's people as, oh, no, this is somehow the Democrats, it's Biden.
Well, they still think, that they were underwater on their mortgage, or the financial crisis was caused by poor black people buying homes they couldn't afford. Yeah. They still believe that.
Right. And it's going to take time for this to flow through. I don't think the fact that eggs are going to be more expensive, not less, going forward for the next several months is enough. But eventually, enough things should pile up that some people in the MAGA movement should begin saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they're not going to buy the notion that it's Joe Biden's fault. How long that will take and how much damage will be done and whether it'll be too late to prevent Donald from making himself our dictator, those are unknowns.
What do you want to say here at the end about Elon Musk?
Well, the richest man in the world is literally killing the poorest people in the world. He shut down with no authority all of this shutting down of agencies is illegal because Congress, under our Constitution, makes the law. Congress decides to spend the money. We had the impoundment efforts by Richard Nixon, which the Supreme Court said, no, Congress makes the law. If Congress says spend the money, you have to spend the money. And here's this private citizen, the richest man in the world. So we already have people who are dead because he shut down AID, people who were supposed to get medicine and didn't. We will have starving children dying soon. And this is so outrageously immoral. And yet there are plenty of pastors out there telling their flocks this is the right thing to do. It's that they can call themselves Christians, but they're not. They're the exact opposite of that. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. And Trump has hinted that he may not follow court orders. They so far haven't complied with some of the court orders. He says, well, I'll appeal. But he's also in the past quoted his favorite president, the literally murderous Andrew Jackson from the 1820s, as saying of an order from the Supreme Court, well, Justice Marshall has issued his opinion. Let's see him enforce it. And I won't be surprised if they don't enforce orders of courts. They openly disobey them. But Elon Musk, by the way, a lot of people don't know this. Elon Musk's grandparents on his mother's side were Canadian Nazis.
Yeah.
When the war ended in 1945, they moved to South Africa to be around people who were like themselves. And what did the Trump administration just announce with the role of Elon Musk as he's our de facto president? Well, they announced that they want to offer refuge to white farmers in South Africa because they're being oppressed.
My understanding is those people, those white farmers in South Africa said, we're not asking for that. We don't want that. We don't want to leave. That's
right. But it tells you the mindset.
I know they're turning away everybody and inviting people that want to be here.
Right.
And inviting people that don't necessarily want to be here.
Because unlike you and me, they're not white. And they're not perceived as Western European white.
And Elon Musk is very, very white. But Trump has a portrait of Andrew Jackson up in the Oval Office. Trump very well. If you were a betting man, what would you say he could say anything about Andrew Jackson? What do you think?
He has. He said he's admired him because he was forceful and he took charge. And
okay, but he doesn't know forceful and took charge. Okay, but what did he do? What did he do, sir? He had something to the Native Americans, and I think he likes that.
Oh, yes. No. Well, in fact, Andrew Jackson was responsible for I think it's the March of Tears, but other horrible events involving and murdering indigenous people.
Trump hates Native Americans.
This administration in court has argued that Native peoples do not have birthright citizenship. And it's a cockamamie argument that has no basis in fact. The Constitution is crystal clear. This is where originalism and textualism is going to come back and bite them. But to argue that Native American peoples can't vote or shouldn't be allowed to vote, how much more clear a sign do you need that this is a male white supremacist administration?
Well, as soon as you brought Elon Musk in, we knew it a long time ago. I'll let you go. I do want to say, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I actually have a painting of David Cay Johnston in my studio.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I have some journalism things here at the Rochester Institute of Technology where I'm a professor now full time.
I just have several pictures of you up. I hope that's cool.
Well,
you're a national treasure.
Better than having your name went out of my mind.
Andrew Jackson.
No. All the actress from TV who all the teenage boys had up on their wall back when you and I were young.
Oh, well, I had several of them as well. And then luckily got to interview them at some point in my career. So it all came full circle. Thank you very much for joining me. As always,
thank you, Peter.
I really appreciate it. I'm so glad you're still out there doing great original reporting and talking to people like me. It's really important. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Take care.
Oh, man, David Cay Johnston. What did you think? Go say hi to him on social media and read DC Report and support all of his work. Always happy when he joins me. You can find out more about him in the links in the show notes as you can every guest every day here on the show. Can't do it without you. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick. So grateful for your support. And I hope to see you in Vegas at PODJAM. Write a rating and review for this podcast. I'll see you at tonight's Hangout. And our great John Carroll taking us out right now.
When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time. trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up.